The Titanic's life was one of luxury and elegance from its conception until its demise. The largest ship in the world with the most advanced technology and the best crew. The sinking of this ship was not due to one single factor, but a chain of events that led to the greatest maritime tragedy in history. Welcome to my channel. And today, let's find out, how did the Titanic sink? The captain's decision. When the Titanic left Southampton for New York, it was filled with excitement and anticipation. Among the 22 to 24 passengers were several well-known personalities, such as John Jacob Astor IV, a multi-millionaire, and Benjamin Guggenheim, a copper tycoon. But there was one important person missing, Morgan Robertson, an insurance magnate who had booked a cabin on the Titanic, but cancelled at the last minute to board the nearby ship. The captain's decision, which proved fatal. Edward John Smith, the captain of the Titanic, had an impressive record and a reputation for being a calm and collected leader. He had sailed the seas for over 30 years and had a vast knowledge of maritime rules and regulations. However, he made a critical mistake when leaving Southampton, which would have disastrous consequences. On April 10, 1911, Smith received a telegram from the captain of the nearby ship, the captain's decision, alerting him to the presence of ice in the Atlantic. Despite this warning, Smith decided to keep to his original course rather than altering it to avoid potential danger. This decision would prove to be a fatal one, as it placed the Titanic on a direct collision course with the iceberg that would eventually sink it. This is the iceberg. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1911, the Titanic struck an iceberg on the starboard side of the ship, causing significant damage to the hull. Despite the impact, the ship remained afloat, but it quickly became apparent that the damage was severe enough to sink the vessel. Although the iceberg only opened up 5 small holes in the ship's hull, they were located in compartments 6, 7, and 8, which were crucial for maintaining the ship's buoyancy. Water began to pour into these compartments, causing the ship to sink lower and lower in the water. The crew tried to pump the water out, but the efforts were in vain. The ship was doomed. Why did the ship sink like this? While the impact of the iceberg on the Titanic's hull was significant, it was not the sole reason for the ship's rapid sinking. In fact, the damage to the ship's hull was not severe enough to cause it to sink immediately. Instead, the ship's design played a crucial role in its demise. The Titanic was designed with a double bottom to protect the ship from external damage while sailing through icy waters. However, the impact with the iceberg caused the ship's plates to buckle and warp, creating gaps that allowed water to pour in. Additionally, the ship's watertight doors were not properly sealed, which further contributed to the flooding of the compartments. The captain's decision not to alter the ship's course to avoid the iceberg, coupled with the ship's design flaws, created a perfect storm that led to the Titanic's demise. Lifeboats. Lifeboats are designed to save people from drowning by providing them with a means of flotation and signaling for help. They come in various shapes and sizes, but all lifeboats have one common goal: to increase the chances of survival in the water. In the case of the Titanic, lifeboats could have been crucial in saving many of the passengers and crew members who perished in the disaster. However, there were no lifeboats on board the Titanic, and this lack of preparedness contributed to the high death toll. At the time of the sinking, lifeboats were not a standard feature on ocean liners, and the Titanic was no exception. The ship's crew were trained in lifeboat drills, but they were intended to be used in the event of a fire or an explosion, not a sinking. As such, the crew were not prepared to deal with the situation, and the lifeboats were not readily accessible. In addition to the lack of lifeboats, the crew's response to the disaster was slow and disorganized. When the ship struck the iceberg, the crew did not immediately begin throwing lifeboats into the water. Instead, they spent valuable time assessing the damage and trying to determine the best course of action. By the time they realized the gravity of the situation and began distributing lifeboats, it was too late for many of the passengers and crew members. Had the crew been prepared and acted quickly, many lives could have been saved. But the lack of lifeboats on board the Titanic proved to be a fatal oversight that contributed to the tragedy of the disaster. No flares. On the night the Titanic sank, the ship's crew failed to use red flares to signal to nearby ships that they were in distress. This oversight may have contributed to the lack of timely rescue attempts and ultimately to the loss of life. At the time, ships at sea were not equipped with electronic communication devices and relied on visual signals to communicate with other vessels. Red flares were a standard signal for distress, and any ship that saw them would be expected to investigate. However, the Titanic's crew did not use the flares until it was too late. The crew had several opportunities to send out flares, but they failed to do so. For example, when the ship first struck the iceberg, the crew could have used a flare to signal that they needed assistance, but instead, they spent time assessing the damage and trying to figure out what to do next. By the time they realized that they needed help, it was too late. The flares would not have been seen in time to save the ship or its passengers and crew. The crew's failure to use the flares effectively was a critical mistake that may have contributed to the lack of rescue attempts and ultimately to the loss of life. If the crew had used the flares properly, there is a chance that some of the passengers and crew members may have been saved. No life rafts. In the early 20th century, life rafts were not yet invented, and the nearest lifeboats were many miles away. This meant that if the Titanic's passengers and crew members managed to escape the sinking ship, they would likely perish in the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. As the Titanic began to sink, its passengers and crew members began to panic. Many jumped into the water in the hopes of being rescued, but they were not prepared for the frigid temperatures and strong currents of the ocean. Within minutes, they began to hypothermic, and many did not survive. The lack of life rafts or nearby lifeboats meant that the people in the water had little chance of survival. Even if they had managed to stay afloat, they would have been exposed to the freezing temperatures of the water for extended periods, leading to hypothermia and eventually death. In today's world, life rafts and lifeboats are standard equipment on most ships, and rescue operations are much more advanced. However, in 1911, this technology did not yet exist, and the sinking of the Titanic was a devastating reminder of the dangers of sea travel. The crew's response. The crew of the Titanic played a crucial role in the events that unfolded on that fateful night. Their actions, or lack thereof, directly affected the outcome of the disaster. For example, the crew's failure to sound the alarm bells and notify the passengers of the impending danger gave many people no time to prepare or even realize what was happening. This lack of urgency likely contributed to the high death toll, as many people were caught off guard and unable to take the necessary steps to ensure their survival. Additionally, the crew's failure to distribute lifeboats and assist passengers in a timely manner also played a role in the tragedy. If the crew had acted quickly and efficiently, more people could have been saved. However, their slow response and lack of organization contributed to the loss of many lives. Finally, the crew's failure to follow proper procedures during the evacuation also had negative consequences. For example, the crew did not lower the lifeboats into the water, which could have helped people escape the sinking ship more easily. Instead, the lifeboats were thrown into the water, making it difficult for people to grab onto them and increasing the risk of injury or drowning. Overall, the crew's actions, or lack thereof, were a significant contributing factor to the sinking of the Titanic and the loss of life. Their failure to sound the alarm, distribute lifeboats and follow proper procedures likely cost many lives and could have been avoided with better training and preparation. I hope you liked the video. Please subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.